My name is Matthias, and for over 2 decades I've served as a priest, guiding my congregation through life's most profound moments, baptisms, marriages, and funerals. My days were filled with prayers and counsel, offering comfort to the grieving and guidance to the lost. I thought I understood life, death, and faith, but as I look back on that fateful night, I now realize how little I truly knew. It began like any other evening. I had just left the home of an elderly parishioner, Mrs. Petrov, who had been battling illness for months. Her frail frame seemed smaller than the last time I visited, but her faith remained unshaken. We prayed together, and she clung to my hand with surprising strength as I prepared to leave. "You've done so much for us, Father. God bless you," she said, her voice soft but firm. I smiled gently. "It's not me who blesses, but God," I replied, patting her hand lightly. Her gratitude stayed with me as I stepped out into the crisp evening air. The sky was a swirl of deep indigo and gold, the kind of beauty that made you pause, just for a moment, to marvel at creation. Sliding into my old, worn car, I began my drive home. That car had been my companion through countless journeys, carrying me to christenings, funerals, and everything in between. The roads were quiet as the town settled into the embrace of night. My thoughts drifted to Sunday's sermon. Repentance, I thought. Perhaps something about faith as more than ritual, a surrender, a transformation of the heart. The rhythm of the drive was soothing. The winding stretch of road was familiar, bordered by tall, swaying trees that whispered in the gentle breeze. But then, as if in an instant, the tranquility shattered. A violent pop pierced the silence. The steering wheel wrenched itself from my hands as the car swerved hard to the right. My heart raced, adrenaline flooding every inch of me. Instinctively, I slammed my foot on the brake, but it was futile. The front tire had blown out. The car careened off the road, smashing through the guardrail with a metallic scream. Time slowed. Weightlessness took over as the vehicle tumbled forward, plunging into the darkness below. There was no time to pray, no time to think, only the deafening crash and the icy embrace of the river. The impact stunned me, leaving me momentarily disoriented. Cold water surged through the shattered windshield, flooding the cabin with merciless speed. Panic gripped me as I fumbled with the seatbelt, its buckle jammed and unyielding. My chest heaved against the restraint, the sensation of drowning clawing at my senses. The water rose quickly, reaching my waist, then my chest, then my neck. My trembling hands fought desperately to free myself, but the current was too strong, the belt too stubborn. My breaths grew ragged, my lungs screaming for air. Every instinct within me urged survival, but there was nothing left to do. The weight of the water pressed down with an unforgiving finality, and then stillness. A strange, profound calm enveloped me as the chaos dissolved into silence. The pain, the fear, the struggle, it all melted away. My vision dimmed until the world around me was gone, and darkness took its place. When I opened my eyes again, I was no longer in my car. There was no water, no crushing pressure, no cold. Instead, I found myself bathed in light. Not harsh or blinding, but pure and all-encompassing. The light seemed to emanate from the very air, filling the space with a presence that was as familiar as it was indescribable. The last thing I remembered was the river, the suffocating cold, the inevitability of death. But now I felt weightless, free. I glanced at my hands, expecting to see trembling, bruised flesh. Instead, they appeared different, perfect, whole. My body, if I still had one, carried no pain, no fatigue, no burdens of age or effort. I felt complete. A presence filled the space, surrounding me with a strength so profound and a gentleness so vast that it brought tears to my soul. It wasn't a voice, not at first, but a knowing, a deep, enveloping love that I had only ever glimpsed in fleeting moments on earth. And then I saw him. The car spun out of control, its battered frame no match for the force of gravity as it plunged down the ravine. The metallic screech of the guardrail gave way to the deafening silence of freefall. In those moments, everything seemed to stop, the shuddering breath in my chest, the pulse in my ears, even time itself. But all too quickly the silence broke, replaced by the violent cacophony of water surging, glass shattering, and metal groaning as my car collided with the river below. The icy water, like 1,000 needles, engulfed me in an instant. It surged through the crumpled windows and flooded the cabin, stealing the air and replacing it with a suffocating chill that clawed at my lungs. Panic erupted inside me. raw and primal, as I thrashed against the confines of the seatbelt that anchored me in place. God, please! The prayer was both a reflex and a plea. My voice, shaky and hoarse, was swallowed by the roar of the current invading my car. My fingers scrambled at the seatbelt buckle, knuckles white with effort as I pulled and twisted. It wouldn't budge. The clasp felt like an immovable weight, as if it conspired against me, sealing my fate in this watery grave. The water rose relentlessly, first soaking my legs, then enveloping my chest and shoulders. My breaths came in shallow gasps, each one shorter than the last as the freezing cold tightened its grip on my body. The very air I so desperately clung to turned into a fading whisper, its presence mocked by the icy flood that now reached my neck. Every instinct screamed at me to escape, to fight, to survive. I wrenched at the door handle, but it was as lifeless as the seatbelt. My fist pounded against the window with every ounce of strength I could muster, the thudding dulled by the water's chilling embrace. My movements slowed, the biting cold sapping the strength from my muscles as it crept into every fiber of my being. For the first time in my life, I felt utterly helpless. No sermon, no prayer, no scripture had ever prepared me for this raw, unfiltered moment of mortality. My mind flickered with images of my congregation, the faces of the people I'd tried to guide over the years. Mrs. Petrov, her frail hands clasped in prayer. My own family, their laughter filling the home on holidays. Had I done enough for them, for God, for anyone? The questions tore through me like daggers, unanswered and haunting. The water reached my chin, and I tilted my head back instinctively, the last shred of air clinging to the roof of the cabin. My body shook violently, a mixture of hypothermia and desperation as my lungs burned with the need to inhale. I fumbled at the buckle one last time, hands trembling, but it refused to yield. I was trapped, utterly at the mercy of forces beyond my control. I felt my strength wane, my body betraying me as the river claimed its due. The world seemed to narrow, the edges of my vision fading into shadow. The roar of the water softened to a muted hum, almost tranquil, as if the river was mocking my struggle by offering a cruel semblance of peace. And then it happened. A strange calm washed over me, pushing back the panic that had consumed me only moments before. The burning in my lungs dulled, replaced by a peculiar stillness. It was as if I was no longer in my body, no longer confined by the relentless pull of the river. The pressure on my chest eased, the frigid cold gave way to an unfamiliar warmth, and for the briefest moment I felt weightless. This was it, the end. My thoughts quieted as I let go, of fear, of struggle, of life itself. A profound clarity filled the void within me, a single, undeniable truth echoing in the silence. I was leaving, but as the river's grip tightened around my earthly form, another presence began to take hold, reaching out to me in a way that transcended the physical. The darkness faded, and in its place there was light, not the glaring, artificial light of this world, but a pure, radiant glow that seemed to pulse with life itself. I wasn't sure if I was seeing it with my eyes, or if it simply was. It wrapped around me, through me, within me, filling every corner of my being. It was neither blinding nor harsh, but all-encompassing, an embrace without arms. Suddenly I wasn't in the river anymore. The chaos, the cold, the struggle, they were gone as if they'd never been. I stood, or perhaps I simply existed, in a vast expanse of warmth and luminescence, my breath steady and effortless despite the lack of air. Instinctively I looked down at my hands. They weren't the same hands that had clawed at the seatbelt moments ago, trembling and bruised by my fight for survival. These hands were different, whole, steady, almost perfect. My body, if I still had one, was free of the weight and wear of years spent serving, striving, struggling. I felt lighter than air, yet more grounded than ever before. I tried to speak, to form the words that seemed lodged in my mind, but no sound escaped my lips. I didn't need to speak. The light, the warmth, the presence surrounding me, it seemed to know. It understood me in ways no one ever had, in ways even I had never understood myself. And then, in that radiant, silent space, I felt him. It wasn't like seeing with my eyes or hearing with my ears. It was deeper, fuller, as if my soul recognized him before my mind could catch up. The presence was strong yet gentle, vast yet intimate. He was there, and I knew without a shred of doubt who he was. Not from the images in stained glass or paintings, not from the stories I'd preached countless times, but from something far deeper, far older, something my very essence had always known. He stood at a distance, yet his presence filled the expanse, leaving no corner untouched. His gaze found mine, though I couldn't see his eyes in the way one sees another's. It was a knowing, a connection so profound that it left me breathless in this world where breath was no longer needed. For a moment there was nothing but silence, not the cold, indifferent silence of the grave, but a living, vibrant silence that hummed with the weight of eternity. And then, without words, without sound, he spoke. My name is Matthias, and as I recount this, the memory of that light remains as vivid as the moment I first saw it. It wasn't merely a glow, it was an embrace, an invitation to step into something extraordinary. I stood, or perhaps just existed, in a realm beyond anything words could capture. This was a place devoid of time, untouched by earthly limits, and filled with a presence that made every fiber of my soul resonate. The light surrounded me, yet it was not harsh. It did not scorch or blind, but rather illuminated my very essence. It wasn't coming from a single source, it permeated the space, as if the air itself had come alive with purpose and vitality. For the first time I felt truly free, free of the weight I didn't know I was carrying, free of the guilt I had buried beneath years of sermons and prayers, free of the limitations that defined earthly life. It was then that I became aware of him. It wasn't a sudden realization or a visual cue. It was as if my soul knew him before my mind caught up. Jesus stood before me, and although I couldn't describe his form in the way I could describe a person, he was more real than anything I had known. His presence filled the space, not as an imposing figure, but as the very essence of love, peace, and truth. At first he didn't speak. His gaze met mine, and in that silent connection I understood more than 1,000 words could convey. His eyes, though human, carried eternity within them. They revealed my failures and my triumphs, my deepest fears and my greatest joys. It was a moment of complete vulnerability, and yet I felt no condemnation. There was no anger, no disappointment, only sadness and love so deep that it felt like the core of existence itself. I wanted to speak, to explain myself, to justify the choices I'd made, but I found I couldn't, not because I was silenced, but because I knew words were meaningless here. He wasn't looking at my actions or my words. He was looking at my heart, and everything I'd ever hidden was laid bare before him. Every sermon I'd preached out of routine, every prayer I'd recited without feeling, every moment I'd failed to truly connect with him, it was all there, exposed yet embraced. And still he said nothing. His silence spoke louder than any rebuke ever could. It wasn't condemnation, it was an invitation to see, to understand, to change. Finally he spoke, not with words but directly to my soul. It wasn't a sound but a knowing, a truth that resonated within me. Come. I didn't hesitate. Somehow I moved, though I wasn't sure how, and followed him as the light seemed to shift and guide us to another space. The endless glow gave way to something even more miraculous, a city. But this wasn't a city as we understand them. There were no towering skyscrapers, no crowded streets, no noise. Instead, everything shimmered with a beauty that defied description. The ground beneath us was solid, yet it didn't feel like earth. The air wasn't heavy but alive, filled with peace and clarity unlike anything I'd ever known. The city stretched far beyond my sight, glowing gold and white, radiating life and purpose. It wasn't just beautiful, it was perfect. Every building, every pathway, every space seemed to exist, not only in harmony but in worship. Even the silence hummed with praise, a melody that wasn't heard but felt, as if the very fabric of the city worshipped its creator. The people, oh, the people. They were not mere spirits or wisps of light. They were fully alive, radiant and complete in a way that made my earthly understanding of life seem like a shadow. Each one carried an undeniable joy, a peace that didn't waver. They weren't busy, they were purposeful. No rushing, no striving, only movement filled with intention and delight. They saw me, acknowledged me with smiles and nods, but they didn't linger or question my presence. It was as if they already understood my journey, and Jesus walked beside me, silent yet present. His gaze occasionally fell on the inhabitants of the city, and in his eyes I saw the love he had for each one, a love so vast it seemed impossible, yet it was undeniably real. I wanted to ask him so many things. Why was I here? Would I ever return? What was this place? But the questions dissolved almost as quickly as they formed. Somehow, I knew none of them mattered, not in this moment. Instead, I simply followed, trusting that whatever lay ahead was what I needed to see. As we moved through the city, the air began to hum with a deeper resonance. The music that filled this place, if one could call it music, grew more vivid, enveloping me entirely. It wasn't coming from instruments or voices, but from the city itself, the ground, the air, the light. It was a symphony of worship, a song that existed not in sound but in being. Every step, every breath seemed to contribute to the melody. It wasn't just beautiful, it was holy. Jesus stopped at the edge of the city, where the golden light met a horizon so vast it seemed to stretch into infinity. He turned to me and his expression shifted. The joy and peace in his eyes gave way to something more somber, a sadness that pierced deeper than any sorrow I'd known. "They have forgotten me," he said, and his words carried the weight of eternity. I didn't understand at first. How could anyone forget him? Churches were full, prayers were spoken, faith was professed by millions. But as his gaze turned away from me, I saw what he saw. The vision unfolded before me, and in it the world I had left behind came into focus. I saw churches, grand cathedrals, simple chapels, bustling auditoriums. They were filled with people, yet somehow empty. The preachers spoke eloquently, yet their words were hollow. The worship was lively, yet it lacked truth. People gathered, sang, prayed, yet their hearts were far from him. Faith had become ritual, religion a routine, and Christ a mere figurehead. "They gather in my name," he said, "but their hearts are far from me." The truth cut through me like a blade. I had spent my life in church, leading people, guiding them in faith, yet I saw now what I had missed. It wasn't about the traditions, the rituals, the structures. It was about him, and somehow we had lost sight of him in the midst of everything else. Before I could speak, he turned to me again. "You must tell them—" The words were not a request, they were a command, filled with both urgency and love. "Tell them to return to me." My heart clenched. I didn't want to leave this place, this perfection, this presence, but his gaze held firm, and I knew my time here was not meant to last. He had shown me this for a reason that carried a weight I could not ignore. As the light around me began to shift, pulling away like fabric unraveling, I felt the city fade. Jesus' face remained the last thing I saw before the vision dissolved entirely. Emerging from the soft glow of the ethereal realm, I stepped into a wonder that defied description. Before me stretched an immense city, bathed in radiant hues of gold and white, more a manifestation of divinity than a construct of human ingenuity. Every surface shone with a gentle luminescence, as if crafted from liquid light, and every structure appeared to be in perfect harmony with the natural order of the universe. The pathways underfoot were paved with a material that shimmered subtly with every step I took. They winded through open plazas and along meandering avenues that invited exploration. Rather than the rigidity of stone or concrete, these paths seemed almost alive, reminding me of the graceful dance found only in nature. With each quiet footfall, I felt a rhythmic pulse in the air, as if the city itself was breathing, celebrating the divine presence that imbued every corner. As I wandered through this glorious expanse, I marveled at the architecture. There were no stark, foreboding buildings here. Instead, every edifice flowed organically into the next, its curves and angles echoing the fluidity of creation. Walls gleamed with a warm, gentle luster, and arches and domes reflected the soft light that appeared to be woven into the very fabric of existence. It was as though every structure had been intentionally designed to inspire awe and reverence, a constant, silent hymn praising the Creator. The air in the city of gold was unlike anything I had ever known on earth. It carried a delicate, sweet fragrance, reminiscent of celestial blossoms and fresh rain. Breathing it in, I felt my spirit lift, each inhalation dissolving the weariness and doubt that had so often weighed on my mortal heart. There was no sense of emptiness or isolation here. Every molecule vibrated with the promise of hope and renewal. The inhabitants of this divine city moved gracefully with an unhurried, purposeful ease. Their faces exuded serenity and wisdom, and their eyes shone with a deep, timeless understanding. They did not rush or crowd like the restless masses of earthly cities. Rather, they seemed to exist in a state of constant, gentle communion with the presence that surrounded us. Smiles and nods were exchanged in quiet acknowledgment, each gesture speaking volumes about the unity and love that defined this realm. I soon found myself approaching a central plaza, a broad open space crowned by an intricate fountain whose waters danced in arcs of pure light. The fountain's melody was not one of sound, but rather of vibration, a soft, resonant hum that seemed to harmonize with the very pulse of life. Standing there, I could feel the gentle murmur of countless hearts converging in silent, unspoken worship. In one particularly inviting alcove, I encountered an elderly man seated by a pool of softly glowing water. His eyes, clear and knowing, met mine with a warmth that dissolved any lingering reservations I had about belonging in such a sacred place. In that moment I sensed a deep kinship, a connection that transcended words or explanations. He seemed to say, without uttering a single syllable, that here in the City of Gold every soul was recognized and cherished. Even amidst the overwhelming beauty and perfection of my surroundings, I could perceive the subtle reminder of a higher calling. This divine city was not simply a sanctuary for weary spirits. It was also a living vision of what the world might become if hearts were lifted above the mundane. Every gleaming surface, every graceful structure, and every serene inhabitant was a testament to the life that awaited those who embraced a deeper, truer connection with the divine. As I continued my exploration, I allowed myself to fully absorb the details. I ran my fingers along the smooth, warm surface of a pillar that stood like a beacon in the twilight, its texture both familiar and otherworldly. I paused to admire an archway that framed a vista of endless light, a window into a realm where time ceased to matter and every moment was a celebration of eternal grace. In these moments I realized that the City of Gold was more than a physical space. It was a vivid reflection of the pure and boundless love that transcended all earthly limitations. Everywhere I looked there were hints of a presence that was both personal and vast, a divine reminder that life, in its truest form, was meant to be lived in communion with something greater than ourselves. The overwhelming luminosity of the city was not intended to dazzle the senses, but to ignite the inner flame of a spiritual awakening. It was as if the very environment was whispering that all things were possible when one surrendered to the call of love and light. Yet amid the splendor and serenity there lingered an undercurrent of urgency. I knew that my sojourn in this resplendent realm was not meant to be eternal, but a glimpse into a reality where faith was renewed and hearts were awakened. The City of Gold was a living parable, a vivid reminder that while the beauty of the divine was ever present, it was also an invitation to carry its message back into the broken, troubled world of the living. In that delicate balance of tranquility and purpose, I felt both at peace and stirred to action. I realized that every radiant facet of this city, every uplifting encounter, was meant to fortify me for the journey ahead, a journey I had to share upon my return. The City of Gold had shown me what life could be when stripped of worldly pretense, when one embraced the truth in its purest form. With my heart full and my mind awakened, I continued to walk through this magnificent realm, determined to memorize every detail. I knew that the vision of the City of Gold would guide me as I returned to the life I once knew, a life that, after this encounter, would never again be taken for granted. In the luminous silence of that sacred realm, I sensed a deep shift in the air, an invitation to peer beneath the veneer of perfection and witness the truth that lay hidden for so long. Even as I reveled in the beauty of the City of Gold, a heaviness began to creep into my heart. It was as if the delicate equilibrium of divine splendor and human frailty was about to be laid bare before me. I walked alongside Jesus, the divine presence whose eyes now glimmered with a sorrow that pierced through my soul. His gaze swept over the expansive vista before us, and in that moment I understood that the radiance of this celestial place was dotted with a reminder of what was lost in our world of routine belief. Look beyond, his expression silently implored. I felt compelled to obey. As we moved away from the bright thoroughfares of the City of Gold, the vision around me began to morph. Like a veil being slowly drawn aside, the scene shifted from pristine light to a series of startling images, vivid, unflinching snapshots of life on earth. I saw churches, grand and humble alike, filled with pews of devoted worshippers. Yet despite the flurry of hymns and prayers, an ineffable emptiness loomed over each gathering. In one vision, I witnessed a massive cathedral with soaring arches and stained glass windows that filtered the light into a kaleidoscope of colors. The building was awe-inspiring, yet inside, the faces of the congregants told a different story. They sat silently, their eyes glazed with distraction. Their lips moved in rote prayer, each word falling like a mechanically recited mantra, devoid of the fervor that ought to have lit the spirit. I could feel the hushed lament of a presence frustrated by this superficial form of worship. Then the vision shifted. I saw smaller chapels and community churches where the numbers were fewer, yet the expressions of despair were no less profound. Preachers on well-stocked pulpits spoke with the cadence of tradition rather than the voice of truth. Their words, though elegant and carefully crafted, lacked the raw conviction and sincerity required to inspire true transformation. I recalled the countless sermons I had delivered over the years, each meant to bridge the gap between ritual and spirit. Now it was as if every word, every gesture had been diluted by the comfort of habit. In a particularly haunting scene, I saw a group of believers in a modest room. Instead of praying or seeking a connection with the divine, they were engrossed in conversations, their minds clearly wandering to the mundane affairs of everyday life. It struck me then that many had fallen into the trap of worship as habit, a checklist for religious obligation rather than a heartfelt surrender to the love that calls them home. Their faith, once vibrant and full of purpose, had slowly shrunk into a passive echo of what it was meant to be. My heart ached as I moved through these revelations. The truth was as clear as it was brutal. Too many of my brethren had allowed the beauty of ritual to eclipse the purity of a life lived in genuine devotion. The divinity of our Creator had been obscured by the demands of modern existence, and the messenger of salvation, the very one I had pledged my life to serve, now looked upon us with a deep, almost sorrowful disappointment. Jesus' silent gaze conveyed a message that no words could. In that sorrow I saw not condemnation, but a profound call to return to the essence of belief, a call to discard the burdens of tradition and reclaim the intimacy of a personal encounter with the divine. They have forgotten me, the vision whispered in my heart, echoing the lament of an eternal Creator watching over a fragmented human race. As the images receded, I found myself standing with him in a realm of unyielding clarity. The stark contrast between the celestial perfection of the city of gold and the fragmented faith I had witnessed was something I could not ignore. I felt the weight of my own failings, the compromises I had made in my ministry. I recalled the countless sermons I had delivered without truly feeling conviction in every word, the prayers that had become a routine recitation rather than an encounter with the living God. The truth was revealed not through harsh rebuke, but through the tender, albeit pained, expression in Jesus' eyes, a look that communicated that our journey could be redeemed, that all was not lost. The message was as simple as it was profound. Authenticity, humility, and a relentless pursuit of His presence must replace the empty comforts of habitual faith. The divine was not bound to the ritual. It was a living, radiant force that demanded every heart to be fully present and alive to its call. Even as the visions faded and I began to feel the pull back towards the world I had left behind, the revelations stayed with me. I understood now that my encounter was not meant solely as a personal epiphany. It was a wake-up call for every soul that had settled into the easy pace of routine worship, a call to genuinely reawaken to the truth of who Jesus is and what He requires of us. In that sacred space, the reality of the world's spiritual condition was laid plain before me, a mirror reflecting both its splendor and its sorrow. I emerged from that vision with a resolve forged in divine sorrow and unquenchable hope, a resolve to return with a message of truth, urging all who would listen to seek the authentic relationship with our Creator. The truth revealed that night would forever change the way I approached my mission. It was a call to strip away the layers of mediated tradition and to engage with faith in its raw, transformative power. Thus, the weight of my revelation pressed upon me with both grief and hope, setting me on a path I now understood was vital for the souls adrift in the modern world. I found myself standing at the threshold of two worlds. The luminous city of gold and the harsh reality of my earthly existence lay in stark contrast before me, and yet in that liminal moment I sensed that my journey was far from over. Amid the overwhelming revelations and piercing truths of what I had experienced, one command resonated above all else, a call not just to bear witness, but to actively awaken the hearts of those still bound to old, hollow rituals. It began as a gentle invitation. At first I mistook it for the lingering warmth of the celestial light. But as I stood alongside Jesus, whose eyes held both infinite compassion and sorrow for a world lost in routine, a new, undeniable authority began to form in his silent expression. His hand rested lightly on my shoulder, and in that touch I felt the weight of a mission that transcended my own survival, a mission born on the wings of divine urgency. Without words, he conveyed to me everything I needed to understand, return to earth, speak to those who had forgotten him, and urge them to seek the intimacy of a genuine relationship with the divine. I felt my heart pounding, not with fear, but with an intensity that fused both purpose and fragility. His presence was a constant reminder that though I had been shown the exquisite beauty of a perfected spirit, the world I was meant to rejoin was mired in distraction and half-lit faith. In that moment, a vision unfolded before me, a montage of faces, churches, and quiet moments of longing, where I saw the silent cry of souls searching for meaning. I recalled the empty eyes of congregants, the rote recitations of prayers without conviction, and the tepid enthusiasm that had replaced earnest worship. With every image, a fresh resolve welled up from deep within me. I knew I must speak. I knew that the message was not a private revelation, but a call for a renewed heart to reach every corner of my community. Jesus' gaze, steady and unwavering, was both a comfort and a command. "Tell them," his look seemed to say, fusing love with the burden of truth. I internalized that simple yet profound command, feeling its echo in every fiber of my being. It was no longer enough to simply exist in the glow of spiritual perfection. I was chosen to be the herald of a deeper, more authentic faith, a faith that did not settle for the shallow imitation of worship, but instead demanded an encounter with the living God. My mind raced with the implications. How would I convey the magnitude of this revelation? How would I urge them to strip away the layers of tradition and cultivated habit to find the raw, exhilarating truth of his presence? I knew that my earthly congregation, and indeed others beyond it, had grown complacent, embracing organized rituals in place of heartfelt surrender. I resolved, then and there, to become not just a preacher of cosmetic rites, but an emissary urging a return to the essence of prayer, fasting, and the living word. The call reverberated through me, transforming every doubt and fear into a burning determination. I recalled every moment of my past ministry, every sermon delivered in the dim light of routine, and felt the sting of remorse for having missed the true spirit of devotion. No longer could I, or those I loved, be content with a faith that only touched the surface of truth. The message was clear. Only through a relentless, vulnerable search for his presence could one be truly saved. As I allowed the vision to recede, I became acutely aware of a timeless urgency. The realm of eternal light pressed upon me with the inevitability of destiny. I was being called back to the earthly stage, not to reclaim what was lost, but to awaken others to the love that remains ever present, waiting for hearts brave enough to seek it. Every step I took in that radiant space reaffirmed my mission, a mission that would demand my soul, my words, and all the residue of every failing moment in my former life. I understood that returning with this message would not be an easy task. I would face skepticism, indifference, and perhaps even outright hostility. The complacency of modern worship had taken firm root, and the comfort of familiar rituals was a hard habit to break. Yet the clarity of my vision dispelled any lingering trepidation. I knew that the simplicity of his command, "Tell them to return to me," was an invitation into a life of genuine freedom and fulfillment. It was an invitation too precious to be ignored. In that sacred stillness, with Jesus' presence gently anchoring my resolve, I vowed silently to dedicate the rest of my days to this divine mission. I would return to the world of the living, carry this call in my heart, and speak it with every breath available to me. I would remind every listener that faith is more than a series of liturgical performances. Faith is a deep, intimate connection with the one who calls our names in the quiet of our hearts. As the cosmic light began to give way, signaling my imminent return to the earthly plane, I embraced the calling wholeheartedly. The realm of the city of gold, with its unearthly beauty and still, poignant sadness, lingered in my memory like a vivid dream, a dream that was now my burden to share. In that moment I felt the duality of hope and sorrow entwined, a potent reminder that while the call to return was heavy with responsibility, it was also a call to usher in a brighter, more authentic era of spiritual awakening. Thus, with a heart brimming with divine urgency and a soul ignited by the incandescent truth of His love, I prepared to step back into the world, a world that needed to be stirred awake by the living call of Jesus, echoing, "Return to me." I awoke to a sound that felt achingly ordinary, a distant siren, a soft murmur of voices, but nothing about that moment could be called ordinary. I was lying in a hospital bed with sterile white walls, IV drips pacing the rhythm of my fragile heartbeat, and the persistent beeping of medical monitors beneath an oppressive silence. It was the exact opposite of the luminous realms I had just experienced. I had returned. The transition was jarring. One moment I was bathed in radiant light and enveloped by a presence that filled me with celestial peace. The next, I was back in a room stained with fluorescent humdrum. My body ached, every muscle screaming from the ordeal, and yet, internally, my spirit brimmed with a resolute clarity. I had seen the city of gold, heard the call of Jesus, and felt the heaviness of truth. Now faced with the starkness of a broken, mundane world, I felt both the crushing weight of earthly despair and the ferocious flame of divine mission. The blurred chorales of nurses and doctors sounded like distant echoes as I tried to collect my thoughts. My eyes, still adjusting to the dim light of the hospital, caught familiar faces gathered around my bed. My wife's eyes were brimming with tears, a mix of relief and trembling concern. My children looked at me with a mixture of wonder and fear. Even my brother, who had been skeptical moments before, now regarded me with a wordless intensity. Their expressions were laden with questions I knew I could not answer with mere words. I had been given a vision, a testament of what true faith was meant to be, and now I was here, tethered to the world I had long believed I understood. In the hushed cadence of the hospital room, I recalled the soundless spoken command that had resonated in the realm of light, "Tell them to return to me." It was not just a whisper from beyond, it was a mandate pressing upon my very soul. With every labored breath, I could feel that call throb deep within me. How was I to narrate the ineffable beauty of the city of gold? How could I translate a divine song experienced with every fiber of my being into the crude language of human words? The echoes of my ordeal clashed with the banality of earthly existence. As the paramedics recounted my miraculous survival, how I had defied the suffocating pull of the river, how my battered body had clung stubbornly to life, they could never understand that my brush with death was not a mere chance event. I had been to the very edge of eternal light and returned with insight that transformed my heart. I now saw the world through two lenses, the broken and familiar, and the radiant possibility that awaited those who truly surrendered to the divine. A series of conversations followed my discharge. Friends and fellow congregants in the church expected a tale steeped in miraculous recovery, an account of an accident narrowly escaped. Yet, deep within me, I knew the truth was far more complicated. The story I carried was not just mine, as if it belonged solely to me. It was a message that cut to the bone, the spirit behind the ceremonies, the genuine commitment that I had witnessed among those luminous souls in the city of gold had withered on earth. I saw churches filled with bodies and empty hearts. I saw preachers speaking with rehearsed eloquence, words that merely entertained rather than awakened. I saw believers, adrift in routines and comfortable rituals, their eyes glazed over with the monotony of habit. It was not the fault of the people, only that society had allowed its focus to turn to appearances, to performances, rather than to a genuine encounter with the divine. Returning to my congregation was a daunting prospect. My inner self was ablaze with a yearning to banish the complacency I perceived. Immediately, the call began to define every moment of my wakeful hours. Every street, every building was imbued with the potential for divine revelation, a chance to remind a soul of the beauty awaiting when one truly seeks Jesus. Yet, the world around me seemed entrenched in distraction. The chatter of daily life, the constant barrage of news and trivial concerns, had rendered the spirit of intimation nearly silent. I went home that day a changed man, yet surrounded by uncertainty and strained expressions. My wife quietly observed my every gesture, her eyes asking questions that I could not easily articulate. "What have you seen? What have you felt?" My children pressed around me like anxious questions themselves, eager yet terrified of a father who now spoke in softer, more deliberate tones than before. The air at home crackled with unspoken tension. Nothing would ever be the same. In the following days, as I struggled to readjust to an existence once taken for granted, I found solace in solitude and prayer. The remnants of the celestial vision clung to my memory as a reminder of what I had experienced and what humanity stood to lose. I wandered the familiar streets of my town, absorbing the simple details that carried an unseen possibility for divine intervention. I observed worn-down churches, busy markets, and tired, hurried faces of people unknowingly yearning for something more. Every encounter fueled the urgency in my soul. I began to pen down my thoughts, attempting to capture even a fraction of the ineffable beauty and despair I had witnessed. With every word, the call grew louder, demanding that I return to my congregation not as a mere survivor of an accident, but as a herald of truth. My heart pounded with the realization that every life I touched could be on the brink of transformation, if only they dared to return to the source of true enlightenment. In that broken world where literal and figurative darkness seemed to reign, I resolved to be the spark that ignited renewed hope. I knew that many would resist the message, that disbelief and cynicism would challenge every earnest word I spoke. But the vision was too vivid, the call too profound, to allow my doubts to silence my purpose. I was Matthias, a man recycled through death and reborn in divine light, and with that new identity came an irrevocable duty to transform the broken world around me. Thus I stepped forward into a future that trembled under the weight of contradiction, where the glorious promise of Jesus beckoned unceasingly even amid the pervasive gloom of everyday existence. And so, with trembling hands and a steadfast heart, I began the slow, arduous journey back to a world in desperate need of awakening. I returned to the pulpit with a heavy heart and a mission that none could deny. It was not only the miracle of survival that I carried within me, it was a message of warning, a clarion call to every soul clinging to the trappings of a comfortable ritualistic faith. I could no longer stand by and watch our church, once a sanctuary of genuine devotion, decay into a theater of empty performances. That Sunday morning, as soft light filtered through stained glass and the congregation settled into their habitual seats, I felt the weight of my responsibility pressing upon me. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edges of the wooden pulpit. It was as if I were about to bear witness to not only my own trial, but to the failing of many hearts that had grown complacent over the years. I took a deep breath and began to speak, not with the measured cadence of a typical sermon, but with an urgency born of cosmic truth. Dear brothers and sisters, I started, my voice echoing across the silent sanctuary. Today I bring you a warning, a plea from the heart of our Lord and from the depths of my soul. We have drifted far from the truth of His love. Our faith, once vibrant and transformative, has been reduced to mere routine. I paused, scanning the rows of familiar faces. There were eyes filled with curiosity, others burdened by skepticism, and a few that seemed to mirror the deep, unspoken longing I felt. I continued, I have experienced something that overturned everything I thought I knew about life and death. I was on the brink of oblivion, and in that darkness I saw the light of heaven. I saw a realm of unspeakable beauty, a city of gold where every soul shone with the radiance of true devotion. But I was also shown a vision of our world, a world where churches echo with words, but the hearts of the faithful lie asleep. A murmur of disquiet rippled through the congregation, some leaning forward in their seats, others frowning as they wrestled with the gravity of my words. I pressed on. I witnessed gatherings filled with people who recite prayers out of habit, who sing praises without truly listening to the voice of God. I saw ministers who spoke eloquently yet missed the essence of His call. Now, I stand before you to say, this is a dire warning. We have forgotten the heart of our faith. We have allowed our love for tradition to outweigh our love for Jesus. My words flowed not as condemning rhetoric, but as tender yet firm counsel. I recalled the visions that haunted me, the image of radiant souls in a divine city juxtaposed with scenes of empty, distracted worship. The truth is, I declared, our faith has been diluted. We have accepted comfort over confrontation, routine over raw, honest communion with God. Our hearts, once ablaze with the passion of true worship, now beat to the cadence of complacency. I took a moment to let the silence settle, to let each member of the congregation harbor the seeds of this unsettling truth. As I looked into the eyes of a young woman trembling in the front row and an elderly man nodding in quiet despair at the back, I reminded myself why I had undertaken this journey. My dear friends, our Savior does not seek merely to be acknowledged on Sundays, I said, voice rising with conviction. He demands a return to a fervor of spirit, a rekindling of that intimate bond we once shared with Him. It is not enough to simply come to church and recite the words, for those words are empty if not infused with heartfelt truth. I recalled vividly the moments I had experienced beyond death, moments of unsullied light and eternal clarity. Imagine, I invited them, the beauty of a communion where prayer is not a duty, but a lifeline, where fasting, not a test, of will, but a sincere surrender to God, where the Scriptures breathe life into us, challenging us to transform rather than to simply comfort. I saw in their eyes a dawning recognition of the emptiness I described, a collective lament that pierced the sanctuary like a long-forgotten hymn. I continued, we must wake from this slumber. We must reject the notion that faith can exist as a mere performance, a checklist of obligations. Jesus is calling us back to Himself. He is whispering in the silence of our hearts, urging us to partake in a reformative journey where every act of worship becomes an act of renewal and rebellion against a world that is too eager to settle for mediocrity. The atmosphere grew heavy with introspection, and I could almost feel the burden of every unexamined tradition and routine uniting the souls before me. I urged them to search within, to confront the subtle seductions of complacency, and to rediscover the transformative love that flowed at the source of our faith. Let this be our warning, I implored softly, that we must never let our gatherings become a refuge for apathy. The divine calls upon us each day, not to repeat yesterday's quiet rituals, but to engage in the living, breathing relationship that He offers. I let my words hang in the air, each syllable charged with the urgency of my vision. In that raw moment, I was no longer just Matthias the priest, the messenger of a personal miracle and a harbinger of change. I was the embodiment of a divine verdict, a soul laid bare before a congregation that needed to awaken from its slumber. As I stand here before you, I said, my voice softening with both hope and sorrow, I warn you with every fiber of my being, do not allow this time of complacency to define you. Let us return to the true essence of our faith, one that leads us to a living encounter with Jesus every single day. Let this serve not as a condemnation, but as a gentle, urgent call to revive what has been lost within our hearts. My words finally faded, replaced by a silence so profound that it seemed to echo with the clamor of 1,000 unsaid prayers. In that sacred quiet, I felt the profound responsibility of the warning I had delivered, a warning not meant to condemn, but to ignite the spark of genuine, fervent devotion in every soul present. After that fateful Sunday, as I stepped down from the pulpit, the reverberations of my sermon clung to the air like an urgent whisper, a plea for transformation that resonated deeply, yet was met with a silence more telling than any response. I wandered through the empty corridors of the church, each step echoing alongside my tumultuous thoughts. In that quiet solitude, I questioned whether my words had truly penetrated the complacency that had long settled over our congregation. The heavy mantle of responsibility pressed on my heart. Would they listen? Was it possible for souls long dulled by routine to awaken once more? I spent the following days in reflective solitude, revisiting every facet of that warning, memories of the divine vision, the luminous city of gold, the sorrowful gaze of Jesus, and the overwhelming clarity of truth, battled with the mundane reality of our earthly existence. I sought solace in moments of prayer, desperately attempting to bridge the chasm between the celestial revelation and the hardened hearts of those I had long guided. Yet, each time I knelt in fervent supplication, I felt both hope and despair intertwine, a delicate tension between my resolve to carry this message and my fear that many would continue to slumber in spiritual mediocrity. In the days that followed, whispers of discontent and uncertainty began to circulate among the parishioners. A few brave souls sought me out after the service. A middle-aged woman, tears glistening in her eyes, softly confessed her inner turmoil. "Father Matthias, your words stirred something in me last Sunday that I can't ignore," she whispered. "I felt empty for so long, but now I'm afraid of what it means to truly live in the light." Her plea was not of accusation, but of genuine yearning for a more authentic connection with Jesus, In that moment, I recognized that the seeds of change, though buried deep, had been sown. Yet not everyone was moved in the same way. A few steadfast voices in the congregation dismissed my warnings as an overreaction. In hushed gossip after services, some questioned whether I truly understood the tradition and comfort our routines provided. "He's changed," one longtime member remarked. "The man before us now preaches fire and truth, not the gentle sermons we're used to." Their words stung, yet I held firm in the conviction that authentic faith requires risk, vulnerability, and a willingness to disrupt the status quo. Determined to continue despite the mixed reactions, I began organizing small, intimate gatherings after Sunday services, a forum for honest reflection rather than formal worship. In these meetings, we shared stories of doubt and hope, of moments when life's burdens felt almost insurmountable, and of the indescribable beauty that sometimes broke through the darkness. I encouraged each person to speak about the times they had felt a quiet push from something greater than themselves. One by one, hesitant voices emerged from the shadows. An elderly man recalled the comforting embrace of a long-forgotten prayer. A young mother described the fleeting peace she felt in silent moments of solitude, and a college student admitted that despite her confidence on the surface, she was deeply tormented by an inner emptiness. These conversations, raw and unpolished, allowed me to glimpse the latent hunger for change that lay beneath the veneer of ritualistic faith. Here, in these small circles, I could see that my warning had struck a chord. Although fear and uncertainty still danced in many eyes, there emerged also sparks of hope, a desire to reclaim a faith not measured by the attendance of Sunday services, but by the authenticity of one's relationship with the divine. As weeks turned to months, the tension between tradition and transformation molded itself into something new. I began to introduce practices that stripped away the burdensome formalities and encouraged personal communion with God. We organized long sessions of open prayer, where no word was too raw or unscripted, and each person was invited to encounter the living Word without pretense. We experimented with fasting not as an obligation, but as a means to clear the clutter of everyday distractions, to make space for dialogue with the deepest parts of ourselves. Slowly, though tentatively, the community began to shift. The transformation was neither immediate nor dramatic. It was more like the slow turning of a key in a lock that had long been rusted shut. Yet, even with these glimmers of renewed hope, I often found myself questioning, will they truly listen? In quiet moments after service, as the congregation dissolved into the cool evening air and I lingered near the altar, I would converse in silent prayer with Jesus. "Lord, how do I reach a heart so entrenched in habit?" I'd ask, seeking guidance in the hushed spaces of my soul. And while I did not always receive clear words in return, I felt His presence affirming that the seeds of transformation, once planted, would eventually bear fruit in due time. Each person's journey back to the heart of faith is a private pilgrimage, a fragile, intimate process that only the sacred can fully understand. My role, I realized, was not to force a conversion of hearts, but to stand as a living testament to the beauty of an awakened spirit. Whether or not every soul in our congregation would heed the warning, I was called to persist, to be a beacon of hope in a world that often finds solace in the comfortable and familiar. As I prepared for another Sunday, a day that I now approached with both trepidation and anticipation, I resolved to continue speaking, the truth, unvarnished and urgent, because the call to return to a genuine relationship with Jesus was too vital to ignore. Whether they chose to listen or not, I had learned that my own journey, illuminated by divine revelation, could not be undone. I would persist, hoping that one day the echoes of my warning might kindle within each heart a spark of genuine, transformative awakening. Thus, as the next service approached, I took a quiet moment before the congregation gathered, feeling the pulse of hope amidst the lingering doubts. In that space of hushed expectancy, I embraced the question that had defined my journey, will they listen? And with a renewed resolve, I stepped forward into the light of that uncertain yet sacred call.